Start the recording. All right, good morning, everybody. My name is Raylene King. I'm the court administrator for the city of Blaine. I'd like to call the Legal and Justice Subcommittee to order. It is July 13th, 2021, and it is 11:31 in the afternoon. I'd like to start with the land acknowledgement statement. Before we begin, we acknowledge that we are gathered on the traditional and unceded territory of the Lummi, Nooksack, Samish, and Semiahmoo people who have cared for and tended this land since time immemorial. Truth and acknowledgement are critical to building mutual respect and connection across all barriers of heritage and difference. We begin this effort to acknowledge what has been buried by honoring the truth. We pay respect to their elders, past and present. Please take a moment to consider the many legacies of violence, displacement, migration, and settlement that bring us together here today. And please join us in such truths at any and all public events. All right, the committee meeting schedule is the first item on our agenda. And we've had some people that have said that they wanted to go to 1 hour meetings. I think my personal thought was that, you know, a lot of us have a lot of different meetings to go to. It's difficult to make all the meetings, and I'm not against doing that. The other item that came up was that a lot of the items that we discuss in Legal and Justice Committee are also involved with behavioral health. Instead of having 2 meetings a year, that we increase the quarterly joint meetings with behavioral health, so that the next one, if we all agreed upon, would most likely be in September. And so that would just increase those meetings to 4 times a year. And my suggestion that would be an hour and a half for those quarterly joint meetings. But our regular monthly meetings, there was a request to go to an hour. So I want some feedback and discussion on that. And if anybody doesn't want that, and then we would need a motion and a vote.
Raylene, was there also some discussion about, or going to be discussion about the time? Because county finance meeting meets on every other Tuesday at around the same time. And so a lot of times county staff have to be available for that meeting.
Hey, Jackie, this is Jill. I think I might be able to answer your question. I believe the rest of the meetings for this committee don't conflict on council meeting days.
Okay.
And generally, when it does fall on a council meeting day, I coordinate with Dana to try to make sure that the meetings don't overlap each other. But for the rest of this year, the dates don't conflict.
So we could revisit the dates towards the end of this year if we need to change that so we don't have conflicts. I know a lot of us have different things in different places, so I want to try to make sure that everybody's able to continue to attend. So I think we don't want to let that fall off and then have conflicts next year, but I think we're good this year. But we still need to discuss, first of all, the time frame, if you guys want to go to an hour-long meeting instead of an hour and a half. So is there discussion on the table for that? Go ahead, Eric.
Yeah, so I'll go ahead and move that we change our meeting schedule to be 1 hour. And I'll also at the same time move that we increase our meetings with behavioral health group and extend the time to be an hour and a half.
I'll second that.
Moved and seconded by Jackie Mitchell and moved by Eric Ritchie. So I just want to know if there's any discussion before we take a vote.
Yeah, so with regard to the meeting time, I would recommend that perhaps we revisit this winter how the hour worked out. And then, I mean, at least that'll give us a few months to see if the hour is enough. And then if it's not, possibly bring it back to the subcommittee to think about going back to an hour and a half if we need to. Or the other option is, when necessary, you know, have that flexibility to go to our hour and a half when necessary. So that's my thoughts.
Appreciate that, Chief Tanksley. Stephen?
I was going to express concern about the adequacy of an hour to really discuss the kinds of issues that I hope we're going to be taking up in the future. I'm somewhat comforted by Chief Tank's suggestions, and I would have voted against an hour alone, but with those kinds of understandings amongst the committee, I'd be in favor of a trial on that. Frankly, I still don't think that would be adequate for us to have the kind of exchange of information and debates and action decisions that we probably want to have, but I would be willing to try it.
Thank you, Stephen. Arlene?
What I notice is that our time frame doesn't seem to allow us enough time to discuss issues. We have time to present them, we have time to listen to reports, and that's all really good. But to me, discussion is a really important piece of our working towards whatever advocacy we're going to have in our community. So, you know, I think now you've set up the vote and the plans in such a way that it has flexibility. So I'm willing to support the measure, but I really want to argue for having enough time to talk things through.
Thank you, Arlene. I understand both sides of it. I see the importance of being able to visit some of the topics more in depth, and I think that's important. Even today's meeting, when we're discussing domestic violence offender treatment, there's so many facets to that topic, so many different presentations that there's no way we'll be able to hit on all of that even in today's meeting. So we're going to have to break it up into a couple different meetings to make sure we get the correct presenters and questions answered. And then it may actually end up going into the September meeting with our behavioral health based on what we're doing here. I want to hear from Deborah Hawley as I see her hand is up. And then if we're in agreement to do a trial method, if Eric is willing to change his motion to make that as a trial. Thank you.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I am in agreement with Arlene on meeting length.
Thank you, Deborah. Eric, are you willing to change your motion to make it a trial?
Absolutely. I think that makes perfect sense, and I appreciate the thought.
Thank you. And Jackie, are you willing to second the, thank you. All in favor, raise your hands or say aye unless Jill has a.
Aye.
Aye.
I believe that passes, if I'm correct, Jill?
Yes, it looks like that was a unanimous vote. If anyone is opposed, please let us know.
Thank you. So we'll revisit this topic again in the winter months to see how this is going. And next topic on our agenda is a domestic violence offender treatment. And we're going to actually start with Bruce Van Glotke and Jake Webush from Whatcom County Probation on what we have currently and concerns and things that we need to do. I believe that there's also possibly some funding requests going on. So if we need to push this to the task force after we've heard some presentations to make sure that funding is where it needs to be, we can do that. So if Bruce, you would like to start us off, and I think he's going to share a screen, so he's got a presentation for us.
Just give me a quick minute to get that pulled up. And so Jake and I have some information that we'd like to share with you about district court probation and also about how we manage DV cases. We've got some information, an update for everybody on the, it's called DV POTS, but Domestic Violence Perpetrator Opportunity Retrievement Services Program that was recently launched within the last year. So unless there's any questions before we get started, we'll just jump right into it. Was that a, I'm sorry, was that a hand I saw? Oh, okay. So let me just do a quick screen share. Okay, so I haven't done a lot of these. So let's say, does this,
Looks good.
okay, is that where we want that to be? The main screen? Okay. So I thought we'd start off by just giving you some really basic information about district court probation. Some of you have already heard this in past presentations I've done over an extended period of time. Otherwise, others of you may not have heard this, but we provide services, monitoring services to 6 courts. The primary court is district court, and our supervisors and the people who direct the work of the department are the district court judges. But we also provide by contract probation services to 5 cities in the county. And those would be Bellingham, Blaine, Everson, Linden, and Sumas. District Court has been around a very long time, and we're something over 50 years. We were established back in about 1968. And so we've been around a very long time. We've got a great staff. They're consistently and constantly being trained on current things going on in our community and about the topics that we find coming through our court system that involve the probation department. The types of cases that we monitor are, I've got them sort of lumped into 3 different categories. 65% are alcohol driving offenses, and this does not seem to change much over time. It could have been slightly more or slightly less during various presentations I've done, but 65% seems to be pretty consistent for alcohol driving offenses that we see coming through the district court probation department. 20% are domestic violence or assault related. And then we have about 15% that could be other misdemeanors or gross misdemeanors. They could be restitution cases where we're assisting the victim in getting restitution. And so this is the general breakdown of the kinds of cases that we see coming through our department. We have a number of specialized units within our department, but really we're going to focus on one of them today because that's the one that seems to fit the topic most closely with what we're here for this meeting for with the agenda. And so I'm going to turn the meeting over to Jake Webush, who is our probation manager. And many of you know him, some of you may not, but he's I don't want to say new to the position because it isn't that new, but he's been the probation manager now for about 18 months. Prior to that, he brought many years of experience as our lead probation officer and a probation officer within the department. So why don't I hand it over to you, Jake, and then we'll go from there.
Great. Thanks, Bruce. So yeah, some of the characteristics of the specialized units, I think Bruce mentioned, we have other ones as well. The pretrial unit, we also have a couple behavioral health units as well. But as far as specialized units in general, it provides a reduced caseload for some more focused attention for the probation officers. It also, probation officers have specialized training and knowledge of appropriate community resources for each of those units. And then the ability to provide a higher level of individual service to those most in need or highest of risk. Thank you, Bruce. Okay. As far as the domestic violence unit, consists of 1 probation officer, as well as a backup as well. The caseload of the probation officer is about 125, give or take a few. And they serve the highest risk based on a validated risk assessment, the offense history, criminal history, and as well as the details of the current offense that they're on for. So we screen them as they come in. They attend the Bellingham Domestic Violence Court, which is a weekly court typically, and involved there. And we also facilitate DV couple DV groups. We have a DV check-in group that would meet every 2 weeks. Just kind of provides a place for them to share and get through probation successfully, as well as we facilitate a DV MRT program, more recognition therapy program. We've been doing that for a couple of years. It's a 24-step program, and we facilitate. It's not technically therapy, even though it says therapy in the term there. It's more of just an approach that is used to intervene in the way of thinking and hopefully change that into better behavior in the future. So those are some of the specifics there. And I think Bruce also mentioned a little bit about the DV Perpetrator Opportunity for Treatment Services, DV POTS. I think we've spoken a little bit at previous meetings, but as far as some background information, this was launched, you can see there, last October, and it's kind of been gaining momentum. It's jointly funded by Whatcom County and the City of Bellingham. They've each provided $20,000 for this year, 2021. I think, Bruce, if you want to click the next one there. Thank you. To date, we are about, I think 25 total, and that's 12 is the county funding and 13 enrolled for the City of Bellingham. We have 18 of those currently are active. 2 have successfully completed, and 5 have failed based on noncompliance or warrants issued. As far as conclusions, I would say it's probably a little early on at this point to be able to know how this is going to turn out, but we're keeping up and filling spots when we can, and we'll see where things are going. I think we have about 75% of the money committed for the county funds for this year. It's a little tricky. We have to be cautious as we forecast, when we commit or somebody's been admitted into it. We need to accommodate. It could be between a 6-month program up to a 2-year program. So the amount of funds, we have to be cautious to always leave a little bit at the end to know that we're not going to overspend for the year. So I think, oh, there you go. Any questions specifically about what we do here at Probation or about the DV POTS?
Not seeing any hands, but I wanted to check to make sure I'm on the right path. Is initially there was a $250,000 amount allocated to a program that, because treatment requirements were being changed, they were going to have a new building, new treatment providers, and unfortunately, I believe all of that fell through. So then we had COVID hit, and that money decreased because the county budget got cut. Everybody had to cut budgets. And now this year, if I recall correctly, that money that is allocated is no longer available to the small cities, but only to Whatcom County and Bellingham. Please correct me if I'm wrong, Bruce.
No, that's correct.
So my next question is, Bruce, when I spoke with you earlier, you said that you were gonna hopefully try to ask for some more funds possibly out of the American Rescue Act. Is that still an option?
No, not at this point. As time has gone by with the Rescue Act, they've fine-tuned what and how that money can be used and accessed. And we did not think originally that money had to be tied to managing a consequence of the pandemic. And we've since found out that it does in fact have the program and the funding requests have to be tied somehow to a COVID event, consequence of COVID. And we're just not able, I can't find a way to do that. And so at this point, that has been taken off the table for consideration.
Okay, thank you. I see Stephen Gockley and Eric Ritchie. Go ahead, Stephen.
Thanks, Arlene. Jake or Bruce, I don't really get any sense of what actually happens in moral recognition therapy or DV POTS. Can you describe what that service is? Can you describe what the measurements of success are? And is there evidence behind the effectiveness of those programs? And then I'll just pack a whole bunch of questions together. My understanding was that the state regulations that Raylene referred to acknowledged the ineffectiveness of treatment approaches previously and made the requirements much more demanding. And so I'm wondering how either MRT or the DV POTS programs tracks with those new requirements.
Sure, Bruce, I can jump in to start.
Sure.
That would be all right.
Yep.
So yeah, Washington, they revised the treatment requirements. It used to be just a standard either 36 or 52 week program. That was changed. They have a whole new assessment and a level program. So an individual required to get a domestic violence evaluation from the court gets an evaluation, and now there's 4 levels of treatment. And so the state did a bunch of research, and they found this to be a model that they had liked. It goes from level 1, I believe, I don't remember the numbers off the top of my head. It's 26, and it goes up to a level 4, which is basically weekly for up to a year, or excuse me, 2 years. So there's a huge range there. With the assessment, it also picks up the need for alcohol, drug, or mental health assessments as well when they do get a domestic violence evaluation. So those auxiliary services are screened and often required or recommended. As far as the DV POTS, what we do is provide administrative oversight for funds for clients, for indigent clients that would qualify. So if they're found indigent in order to have a domestic violence evaluation, they go and do that. We then provide reimbursement of services to the couple providers that have been qualified to do those in our county. So that's where the DV POTS comes in. We don't provide the treatment there. We just provide the administrative oversight for the funding for the treatment that they go to. As far as the DV MRT, it's just a different model that's been used in the past. It is evidence-based, and it's shown to reduce recidivism. It's just a very basic 24-step program that we kind of implemented before. We were having some reduction in some providers in our community, reduction in funds. This is before DV POTS, and so we needed to come up with kind of an alternative. So we have 3 trained staff in district court probation who facilitate those groups. It's a book that the individual works themselves through, and they have to pass each week, each 24 step, and they get through, and then they graduate after they complete that 24 step. So we're not providing really the therapy there. We're providing kind of just a guide in the book and facilitating each step that they go through and working on their behaviors there. So a little bit different philosophies, but hopefully there's similar outcomes. Go ahead.
Thank you, Jake. I don't know, I saw Arlene's hand up and I saw Carol's hand up. So if Arlene wants to go first and then go to Carol?
Yeah, I've been trying to read up on the latest studies on treatment, and I see from my reading that this issue of treatment for offenders is very, very complex and full of problems. So many different models have been used and discarded for something new. And so it makes me wonder, because I'm a therapist, about patterns in order to treat people. So my one question I have is, do you find that certain diagnoses are common in domestic violence offenders?
In regards to their behavior in domestic violence, or in regards to?
Yeah, there's psychological diagnoses. Does anybody diagnose them?
If that comes up through an assessment for additional, like a mental health condition, is that what you're referring to, or?
Yes, because there are certain diagnoses that are practically untreatable.
Sure.
Right? And so if the reason that all these treatment methods are ineffective or not changing the statistics, then it may be that that it is because there are common diagnoses that show up in offenders. Because if you put behavioral techniques on someone and that person has a diagnosis that is not going to receive or accept any real change in attitude or behavior, you're just throwing it into the wind, so to speak. But on the other hand, if there were individualized treatments, which is not generally what's happening, there might be some hope for changing behavior.
What I can say in the assessment, if they're found, with severe personality disorders, they are typically put in the level 4 and they're separated out from all the other levels and are kept just on that, on either one-on-one groups in that level 4 for personality disorders, or sometimes always managed in a group as well with other level 4 providers, clients. So I know that is part of it. But as far as other disorders, I guess a provider would have to best explain that answer for you.
Bruce,
Yeah, I mean, if I were to guess about that, which I don't have any of the statistics, but I would think that narcissism would come into the picture sometimes.
That's that level 4, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, the personality disorder. There's usually screened and put in that, and we do have a few. They're in that, and I think I don't remember the details. It's either 18-month or 2-year program, but yeah, those are challenging cases for sure.
Yeah, well, I mean, okay, so I'm just expressing my concern over the fact that there don't seem to be highly successful treatment systems for DV offenders. And I mean, I don't have an answer for it except individualized treatment, of course, which is very expensive.
So Arlene, in the group, I just want to, and Jay, correct me if I'm wrong, but a mental health evaluation is not a standard part of a domestic violence assessment. Now, they may pick up on some things, and the person doing the assessment may say, wait a minute, we really can't move forward with DV treatment until you get a mental health evaluation. But a mental health evaluation is not standard in any way with a domestic violence assessment.
That's correct. It's a component. It's one of the factors that they do assess if there are mental health concerns, and a kind of a pre-screen, I guess you could call it. And then a mental health evaluation could come as a recommendation of the DV evaluation.
Keeping in mind, we don't make the rules.
No, I'm not blaming you. I really think that if we're going to consider this, we need to look at what's going on and not just be, throwing our funding into a pit and not getting, the results that we need.
thank you, Arlene, and responses from Bruce and Jake. And Arlene, I'm hoping that we might have some more answers in our next meeting in August. And Amy Roberts is going to join us and speak a little bit more about domestic violence treatment. She was a key individual in the WACs that were created to change up the domestic violence treatment requirements. And so maybe she will be able to fill us in on some information from Amy Roberts. We don't have a lot of statistics yet because this is all new, and Jake and Bruce have also said, it's kind of new to see what's happening there, but hopefully she might shed some light on reasons why the state has decided to change this. And I saw Carol's hand up earlier, so I want to jump to her.
Thanks, Raylene. And I completely agree with the concerns about the complexity of the effectiveness of DV treatment, and I'm really glad you're going to have time to talk with Amy. I'm actually wondering it might be helpful to send her some questions ahead of time. I think she has a tremendous wealth of knowledge and experience and contacts, and that might use the time well. In addition to the effectiveness question, I think access to treatment is a really profound issue, both for whatever effectiveness is available through DV treatment that can actually reduce problematic and harmful behaviors that people are experiencing that are affecting their families, but also, as this committee is well aware, to reduce all those negative effects of involvement with the criminal justice system. And so to that end, I'm concerned that the program to make participation in DV treatment accessible is not available across the board throughout Whatcom County at this point. I work as the prosecution-based DV specialist in the small cities, and I work really closely with the people in corresponding positions in Whatcom County and City of Bellingham. And we work so closely together because we do not work with separate pools of families or individuals. People in this county who have any history of domestic violence re-offense have that history across all of our jurisdictional boundaries. And so we will often see somebody who's getting put on probation in Blaine or Ferndale or Everson who has prior history in Whatcom County courts or simultaneous overlapping history in Whatcom County courts. And so I guess I'm speaking up in favor of any potential of expanding that DV POTS funding that provides access to DV treatment so that defendants in the small cities could have access to that. Again, for the benefit of the family, but also because participation in treatment is a primary way that domestic violence offenders end up spending less time in jail or end up being able to avoid having serious convictions that can really limit job possibilities and housing possibilities and other opportunities that they might have. So yeah, I guess that's my concern. Thanks.
Appreciate your comments, Carol, and I concur with your concerns. My understanding is that we can usually find funding through insurance for drug-related issues and alcohol-related issues and mental health-related issues. But when somebody is charged with a domestic violence crime and they're offered to do a deferred prosecution or an area to get maybe an SOC, a stipulated order of continuance, if you do X, Y, and Z, which may include the DV treatment programs that are state requirements, if the judge says they have to go through a state program, and then that individual doesn't have the funding, they are not able to pay for it, which seems to be a lot of the domestic violence individuals that are arrested. They might lose their job when they go to jail. There's a lot of consequences when somebody's arrested for DV. And then if they don't have any of the other things and they're not getting that state required treatment, they may not succeed. And that may be something that would be offered to somebody that did have the money. And then that one person that was able to afford the treatment that was required may get his charge dismissed, but the other person, Joe wasn't able to do that. Joe didn't have the money for the treatment. Joe can no longer go to Canada and visit relatives up there anymore because he's now got a domestic violence conviction charge. Joe can no longer purchase a firearm, which may or may not be a good thing. And Joe also is having a problem finding a job. He can't find housing, and he didn't have the alcohol problem, so there was no state treatment there. He just couldn't do the other program. At least that's my understanding. And so I think making sure that if we're doing these treatment programs, that we fund it so that everybody has the opportunity to go to it if they so wish to do so. Eric.
Thank you. Yeah, I just have I guess changing direction a little bit. Bruce and Jake, I'm wondering if you've been contacted or have thought about having some diversion opportunities based on the new Blake fix law. Is it possible that district court could handle those 2 diversions that are required?
You know, I think that we can. And the kind of programs that I would think would probably come out as a result of Blake is kind of exactly what we do as a department in terms of monitoring compliance or non-compliance, communicating with collateral contacts and community agencies, working with prosecutors, reporting success and failure to different parties, just depending on what kind of monitoring situation. I think that we would be able to do that. We have a great communication tool system set up with our new case management in terms of text messaging. We're set up to do Zoom meetings if those are more appropriate for the individual. We can do some in person. So I think that that is kind of just exactly what we do is, I mean, diversion kinds of programs. And Jake and I can work on getting you a few more details if it gets you a little more, itemize it a little bit better, some of these things we're talking about.
Yeah, no, that'd be great because we're talking about, you know, what we're going to do, where we're going to send people to the diversion. Of course, law enforcement wants to know because they're supposed to be directly sending folks to diversion rather than an arrest. So yeah, if we can get some things together, that'd be awesome.
Yeah, and I think that we'd have to have a discussion at some point as the mechanism to how that actually is going to work. But to me, those are details. I can talk to Judge Elich about it as well and see where he's at with this. Yeah.
Great.
Thank you, Eric. I do have a question. Jake, you were mentioning that it's actually a book that they go through and complete. Have you ran across any individuals that have the inability to read or write that wouldn't be able to complete that? And do you have options for those individuals?
Sure, we can meet with them. We've had some, that have challenges. If they don't have someone to help them out outside of here, we've set up Zoom appointments. We've met with them ahead of time. We have time at the end of every session, to be honest with you, that is where they need to work on their assignments for the following week. And they also have community helping hours they have to do as part of their program. So what we've seen is that others help those individuals out after the group to get, number one, their own helping hours, and then number two, to help that other person be prepared for the next week. So yeah, we have a couple different mechanisms we can help with those.
Thank you. Are there any other questions for Bruce or Jake? Ethan.
I guess this is for Bruce, but maybe Jake. Do we have any data that tracks recidivism, repeat offenses, anything like that across jurisdictions over a period of years? And if not, how can we get that?
So are you talking about the DV POTS funding clients?
I'm talking more in terms of DV charges, somebody who goes through something and then reoffends 2 years down the road. Do we have any way to track any of this?
I think the short answer is no.
What would it take to start developing that?
Well, this is my opinion only, so take it for what it's worth. I think that we would need to have almost a position dedicated to the law and justice system that could help coordinate data, either collection or analysis or both. And the reason I say no is because there isn't, for example, we've got a probation case management database. We've got the state judicial information system. Superior Court has got a companion but different system. And in the middle of all that, the state has this data warehouse. But when it comes to things like recidivism and reoffense, there isn't just a button. And Raylene, you may know better than I do because you may be more up on is it Boxing now we're using or BIT or those queries. But there isn't a button you can click to get what you're asking for. It would have to be, in my mind, somebody who is dedicated to either hand collecting that and compiling it in some useful manner, or trying to find a way to get a different alternative. And I don't even know what that would be. But at this point, I'm not aware we have any good way to do that.
Bruce, I think we might be able to actually create that request. I think I can go into BIT, anything that's on the PLS screen in JIF, which you would have MHE, which is your mental health order, or probation, which is the most common one that all the courts actually put in the system. And then we could run it with anything with a DV tag over several years and see if there's been recidivism on those individuals. So I think I could probably submit a request to AOC and ask them if they can help me create something, or I can ask the listserv and see if they've already got something similar to that. But I think somewhat we can do, whether or not we can say that they're in the DV pots or a state treatment requirement. I don't know that we could do that. That would have to come back and say, okay, these are the repeat offenders. Have you had any of these individuals in that program? And that would be the only way I think we could do that portion of it. So I don't know if that's possible on probation's area, but I also see Carol's hand up. So I'll go to Carol real quick and then come back to you.
Oh, just briefly, that might provide some interesting information to see if people are arrested again for domestic violence crimes. But I guess I would just also caution that it's a really complicated question. How do you measure the success of treatment? And it's also really complicated because what a domestic violence criminal charge means it's such an enormously wide range. So somebody might have completed a treatment program and there's a no contact order that's still in place, which the victim does not want. And the victim is actively seeking contact with the defender. And at some point there's an arrest for a no contact order violation. But maybe otherwise, many, many things are going well. So does that count as a treatment failure? Or, I could go on. It's a huge area of active research in the academic world as well as the legal world. But recidivism is not a simple question.
Stephen?
Thanks. And Carol, that's very informative. I wasn't trying to answer that question. I was just, my sense is that we may be headed toward some recommendations in this area. And Raylene, you mentioned some funding requests that would expand the $20,000 appropriations. If we're moving toward some sort of recommendation, it just seems to me that we want to be asking these questions. We want to be assuring that we're as evidence-based as possible, and that we're moving in the direction of really effectiveness. Because I don't think the treatment programs that we had 5 years ago, nobody seemed to see them as being effective, and yet we were running them. So I think we want to do better with this, and we have to be asking those sorts of questions, understanding both the complexity and some ways to weave our way through that complexity. That was the motivation for my question.
No argument at all. Thanks, Stephen.
Thank you, Stephen. Is there any other comments or questions for Jake or Bruce on this matter? Okay, I have one. If we did ask for funding to go forward to make sure that we had money for all individuals that were indigent that needed DV treatment, how much do you think we'd need, Bruce?
That's a good question. I'm not, well, let me put it this way. When we thought we had the $200,000 plus that amount, I was thinking that would go an awful long way in covering it. I didn't really have a chance because it kept getting knocked down and the amount of funding we were going to get. So we didn't get a lot of chance to really work a lot of big numbers in with those larger dollar values. That's Jake, do you have any sense of that? I'm having trouble giving you an actual number.
No, I agree with you. It's a little bit tricky, but I did think when we had that original amount, we would probably be able to swoop in with pretty open arms for that. So
yeah.
So we're going to revisit a little bit of the DV treatment next at our next meeting. And if you guys could ponder the amount. The other thing that I have concerns about is Ferndale is kind of left out of this because they don't have a contract with Whatcom County Probation, and for legal reasons. It's not necessarily in the best interest of the county to offer this because there's not a contract and they have their own probation department. But they still have indigent individuals that need treatment or required to have treatment through court agreements. And I don't want to leave any of the small cities. I want to make sure that all of Whatcom County, because what I've seen is I'll have somebody in my court and then they move because they have to. They're no longer allowed to go back to that house. So they move to Bellingham or they move to somewhere outside of the city limits. And then there's a charge in district court and then there's a charge in Bellingham. So I'd like to make sure that individuals that are not just in Whatcom County or just in Bellingham, and try to somehow include Ferndale as well to make sure that everybody has equal opportunity. So you guys can ponder on that. And if you have a list of questions for Amy Roberts, because she'll be joining us at our next meeting, please send those to myself, Arlene, and Jill so that we can get them off to her prior to the next meeting on state requirements and anything that you think would be beneficial to domestic violence treatment for offenders as well as victims. I also have a concern that we might want to bring into behavioral health with individuals that are arrested and booked with the allegations are sometimes homeless after this, and making sure that they actually have a way to get around and do what needs to be done so that they can maybe go back to their family if that's a possibility because of the way the system is working. But I also see Stephen's hand up, so go ahead, Stephen.
Thanks, Raylene. I think we should formulate those questions for Amy Roberts. For our local experts, Carol being one of them, I'm also wondering what we think our local capacity is for DV treatment, not just how many people we need money to pay for because they're indigent, but how many we could actually run through treatment if we could pay for everybody. So that's one question. And the other is I see Maya on the call, and I'm wondering if some of the complexities that Carol touched on, whether she has some perspectives she could share on how that looks from her side of the processing of these cases.
Sorry, I'm eating my lunch as I try to attend this meeting. And I'm sorry, I don't think the first part was aimed at me, but I think it was like about efficacy of domestic violence counseling to prevent recidivism. Is that kind of where you were going, Stephen?
Yeah, and sort of the complexity of no contact orders that the victim doesn't want to remain in effect, and how all this plays out from the defendant's
I mean, just in court this morning, they weren't my cases, but I listened to several requests that no contact orders be lifted with the protected party present making that same request that were denied. Once in place, it's very difficult to dial those back and get judges to do that. And I think one of the requests was that they could be in proximity of one another to attend marriage counseling, and that was denied. So it's difficult. And then shatters families and increases their poverty because they're trying to support 2 households or 1.5 households if someone's sleeping in a car or something. So yeah, it can be really destructive. I also understand the protective nature and why some cases really need it. The efficacy of domestic violence treatment. I mean, I've never seen any research to show that there's like evidence-based, treatment or, that's gonna do anything. I've seen nothing that like that. I think at one point, Eric and I talked about after I attended a DV SAS meeting where it was articulated from the victim community that they wish there was some alternative to prosecution, like maybe working through some kind of like restorative justice kind of thing. And Eric and I have had a couple conversations loosely around that. But it didn't seem like it was getting very far. So I think there's like a desire from the victim community for that kind of avenue. But I think everybody's just so worried about being liable if something terrible were to happen, that people are just so afraid to give any leeway. That's what I see. Yeah.
Yeah, I'd like to respond to that. So I'm not really as concerned about liability as I am about having an effective program. I know that there has been some talk about programs, and I'd love to see one that's working in another area and copy that, because I think that this is an area that Whatcom County could really use some help with. I'm all in favor of some sort of program that I guess is just an alternative program for a DV. There hasn't been in the past here, and I know there's room for it.
We found it was at Thurston County. I don't know. I thought that there was one county that was doing a domestic violence court. I would have to reopen, refine my research on that.
Thank you, Maya. Ann, I saw your hand up.
Hi, I'm sorry I was at a council meeting, and so I'm late today. I want to weigh in just briefly on the clinical aspect of this, in the sense that I believe there are a number of challenges, not the least of which having the county somehow involved in either funding or providing domestic violence perpetrator treatment. That in and of itself is problematic from my point of view for a number of reasons. But clinically speaking, we know that behavior change takes a significant length of time, no less than 9 months of very intensive intervention. And behavior change is one thing, but we're also talking about people whose behavior is triggered first by their thoughts and then becomes very dangerous. We do not have in our state a treatment program that I believe is sufficient to make significant changes in and of itself. And so I just want us to be really thoughtful and cautious about what we as a county using taxpayer dollars invest in, because I don't want to offer a false promise that somehow we're going to make a difference. And I also don't want to put the county at risk. And I can certainly talk a lot more about the clinical aspects, but the current program was designed in part because insurance will not cover this. And therefore they tried to provide the most expedient process possible. But once a week treatment for significant behavior change simply is typically not indicated in any clinical journal. So things to think about. I don't disagree that this is a much needed service. I just don't think the county has a place in it. And I also don't know that we have what we need in our community to provide truly effective treatment.
Thank you, Ann. Bruce, and then Arlene.
So I just wanted to clarify, thanks, Ann, for those comments. I just want to clarify for everyone that the DV POTS funding, the 20 from the county and 20 from the city, that's a funding source only. That is not actually treatment or assessments itself. It's a mechanism with a funding source that allows those determined to be indigent who meet certain qualifications, and also treatment agencies who've qualified, including have a contract with the county, that they're able to connect, we're able to connect those for indigent defendants. So it's what we have going right now is a funding source only for assessments and treatment. It isn't an actual program itself.
Thank you, Chris. I think Arlene had her hand up and then Eric.
So, what Anne said is completely true and depressing information. But then it leads me to the question, should we do nothing? Does that mean that we should just throw up our hands and not have any attempt at treatment? It makes me think about the cases of addiction where we fully accept and understand that addicts will return to their addiction over and over again before they get completely to stop using. So it may be that this condition or set of behaviors is like that it has to be repeated over and over again for people to fully absorb what it is that they need to learn.
Thank you, Eric, and then Anne.
Yeah, so I just wanted to say that I appreciate treatment, and we could be talking about that all day, I'm sure. But what I was talking about wasn't necessarily treatment. I was talking about restorative justice and talking about situations where for some cases, it's not for every case. It's for some cases where we don't see the same kind of danger. Some cases where we might be able to unify people and bring some justice so that people are comfortable being around each other again. Again, it'd be a program of restorative justice, not necessarily treatment. Maybe we could be talking about treatment in part of that, but I mean, I don't know. Anyway, I'll just stop right there.
Thank you, Eric. Anne?
I'm going to be a broken record, but I haven't seen, so first of all, addiction treatment is much more intensive than the current protocols for domestic violence offender treatment. Treatment for substance use disorder has high degrees of positive outcomes relative to treatment for things like diabetes, heart disease, etc. But it's a very intensive program, many more hours a week, many more support hours outside of treatment as well. None of those are offered in the domestic violence treatment protocols that the state has set. And in terms of restorative justice, I hear what you're saying, Eric, but again, I think that I just, from the literature I've read, restorative justice, of course, first started with the juvenile population, a different population, a different mindset, different brain maturity. And I just think that, again, restorative justice is not for the true domestic violence offender. It simply is not effective. I just have to say that, which maybe there's other things. And in response to what do we do or not do, I think two things. One, if we're looking for county or taxpayer dollars, I think we have to be incredibly conscientious and thoughtful about how we invest those dollars. Separate from, private donations or grant monies or whatever else, that might be something different. But when we're using county dollars and hanging our hat on a program, we have to be really, really thoughtful about what we're investing in so that we don't set up the county and that we don't, again, offer false promises to the community.
Thank you, Anne. I respect everybody's opinions and thoughts. I think everybody has strong points on domestic violence, and we don't always know what is going to work and what's not going to work. And we've seen a lot of stuff that doesn't work, but we've also seen new programs. I mean, we're leading edge in Whatcom County for the Crisis Triage Center that was just completed. And, we want that to work. And now they're talking about using this new 988 system to send out social workers, which personally I think is a high risk. I mean, is it going to be safe? And do we need an officer there? Or do we remove an officer? there's so many different questions that need to be addressed when we try new programs. We have mental health court now, we have DV courts, we have veterans courts. There's a lot of different things that are out there that we try because we don't know what else to do. So sometimes we have to do something to see if the results are there. And I don't have the answers. I don't know what's going to work and what's not going to work. I think we have so many facets of domestic violence that have to be addressed to see where the funding needs to go, which is why we're having this conversation. I think of cultural issues and ethnic issues. I know we've had an individual that moved here from Iran, and he was charged with domestic violence, and he didn't understand what he did wrong, and he also didn't speak English. So the judge says, well, I want him to have treatment, but I want it to be done with ethnicity and cultural facets to make sure that he understands what he can do and can't do and what's wrong with it and changes he needs to make. I remember a young gal that I went to school with many years ago, and she explained to me that she had a boyfriend at Whatcom Community College, but she couldn't tell her dad because she had an arranged marriage. And then if she didn't fulfill her role, there were going to be consequences from the family. And so there's so many different issues that, and we kind of are a melting pot in this county. We've got a lot of Hispanic and Russian influences here. I see more East Indians coming through with the border. We see what Carol said with the no contact orders and victims not wanting the no contact orders, but the judges feeling that they need to do something to protect the victims that were involved in this case. And maybe they don't want them, but the state thinks that's what we need to do. So unless we have different protocols that doesn't have the consequences that are so devastating to an individual that's charged and convicted of domestic violence, and some way to help those individuals and treat those and make sure that we're treating everybody equally, to the degree of, there are different steps. Some people need more drug and alcohol treatment. Some people need mental health treatment. Some people just need to make sure that they have enough funds to feed their family. So I think we kind of need to come back to the domestic violence again, speak with it with Amy Roberts, who was, like I said before, and very implemental in the last WAC for different treatment to see why the state decided that. What are the reasons that we think that one's going to work prior to what we had before? If there's any other questions or comment, I'm willing to take that. Otherwise, I think we need to move on to the next topic, and then we'll discuss more of this at the next meeting. But I would like any questions that you may have for Amy Roberts so we can compile them and give them to her prior to the next meeting in August. Any other hands? Seeing none, I thank everybody and Bruce and Jake for the presentation. I think that was very beneficial to see what we've actually got out there, and other needs or questions, put them in your thinking cap for August. And then the next topic is a recent state legislative impacts to the criminal justice system. This was discussed at our last steering committee. I believe in your packet, Jill put the memo from Bellingham on the summary of the state bills. If you could put that up, Jill, for me on the screen.
Yeah, sure. Just give me 1 minute to do that.
Thank you. I know there's been a lot of questions. What can officers do? What can't officers do? How all these new law changes are going to impact and who's supposed to respond. There were questions that were brought up at the steering committee about people having the fire department come out instead of law enforcement, and then the fire department really wasn't trained to respond to some of these calls. So I'd like to hear from other individuals, and this is probably going to be a topic at the next task force meeting. So I kind of wanted to make sure that everybody had time to look at it, think about it, and make comments on it, so that if we are asked about it at the next task force meeting, maybe we have some direction. So Chief Tanksley, I see your hand up. I'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, thank you. So in fact, last night at the Blaine City Council, myself and the city prosecutor did a presentation for our council with regard to the impacts that some of these laws will have in the way that first responders, specifically the police, will respond. But also the reason why we had our presentation is we want the community to know about the different impacts. But, you know, one of the bills that I really want to highlight is HB 1223. And if Jill could scroll down to that one, should be on the third page, I believe. And that's the bill regarding electronic recordings of custodial interrogations. So if you read the text within the bill, it speaks to making these interrogations anywhere, even on the street, that they have to be recorded. There are some exceptions to that. For example, if a suspect is in custody under arrest and the officer tells the person that they're going to be recorded, the person can request not to be recorded, you know, to make a statement. However, that agreement has to be recorded according to the bill. So essentially, to me, this is an unfunded mandate because most agencies, police agencies, are going to have to get body cameras in order to, in my opinion, be within the law with this bill. I'm totally pro body camera. You know, I think most agencies should have them, and we don't have them yet in Blaine, and hopefully we will. So I just wanted to highlight that this bill definitely is an unfunded mandate to me, and it's going to have some implications on different jurisdictions with regards to how they implement this by January 1st, 2022. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief Tanksley. On that bill, I would say not only do you have to purchase the body cams, but you would also have to have possibly one, if not two, full-time records personnel to review all of that data when there's public records requests, because a lot of it has to be deleted, or they can only give out portions of it because you can't have juveniles, and there's so many different laws under the PRA. Do you have any idea on how many staff you would need just for records retention and release on body cams?
Well, so at one of my other prior agencies, we did have body cameras. They did work well. However, it really depends on the agency and how many public records requests that agency gets. However, if you have a specific average that you get per month or per year with body cameras, that can increase. So I've heard of some agencies where a person just requested every single incident from, you know, a whole year. So that's very labor intensive and it takes a lot of time. However, through technology and the enhancement of technology, the redaction has, you know, it's not as labor intensive as it was 5 years ago, for example. So I've not looked at how many staff members it would take, but what I can tell you, depending on what platform you get, that they do have classes that your staff could take. And then if it's a case where you might need that to be professionally redacted, by a person that's an expert witness in forensic videoing, then of course you might have to contract that out. So it will require some extra hours. So I don't know if that's going to be a 1 FTE, 0.25, 0.5, but it will require some extras. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief. I see Stephen's hand up.
One question I have on this, I was at the steering committee when this came up, and most of the discussion, and it was quite extensive, was directed at HB 1310 at the bottom of this page. And so I think that will be part of the focus for the task force discussion to come. And when I saw Mark Gardner's memo, it wasn't aligned with the information we had at the steering committee. This calls for the adoption, HB 1310, the summary here calls for the adoption of this civil standard for permissible use of force a year and a few months down the road in 2022. And my understanding from our discussion was that the sheriff's office and maybe Bellingham Police Department, and we didn't have anybody who could speak to other municipal police departments, were already changing their practices and refusing to go out on non-criminal calls, I guess, as a precautionary step to protect against liability for use of force. Either this has already gone into effect in actual practice on the street, or it's about to within a matter of a couple of weeks. And so I wonder if Eric is still on the call, or whether Chief Tank could speak to this. And my main question is toward whether there are changes already rolling out on HB 1310, despite the time frame that seems to be articulated in the summary of the statute.
So Stephen, if you could give me just a minute or two, I'm going to double check that. I believe that memo may be a typo with that date, so I'm double checking that right now.
Yeah, that was my understanding too. I thought there was only one statute that was delayed, and I don't think it was the use of force. I think that use of force was to be implemented in July of this year. And anyway, so I'm not sure the summary is correct.
July 25th is the start date.
Thank you. And it's my understanding that implementation has happened. They've been putting these I guess restrictions into effect on supporting EMS and mental health calls, and yeah, there's a lot of concern from both sides about how to handle this based on the new statute.
The other issue that I think is concerning is that police officers as individuals may be held accountable under this law for not following its intent. And so there's police departments have chosen to be very conservative. We have obviously been working very closely with the Washington Chiefs, or the Whatcom Chiefs, as well as the State Healthcare Authority that oversees the behavioral health services, and certainly EMS, and working with our behavioral health providers as well to figure out how to manage this messy situation. Messy because in talking with the legislators that initiated this language, they said they didn't intend for some of these outcomes to be the way they are. So a bit short-sighted on their part.
I will say also with HB 1223, with the mandates for the recordings, it's going to hurt a lot of jurisdictions like mine that do not have existing funding for that particular measure, and to get the body cam. So of course we're going to research grants and things of that nature. So if anyone has any ideas where to get some money, don't hesitate to let me know.
Thank you, Chief Tanksley. There's a lot of bills, a lot of things changing. The Blake decision, the driving while license suspended third decision, the body cams, the use of force. Well, there's a lot of information here. Is there any comments or questions on any of the other Senate bills or House bills? Thank you. Stephen, is this something that when we discuss it at the task force level, that could be brought to the council to look for funding for the small cities? To either purchase body cams as a grant or even to be able to provide a liaison for public records?
Well, I think the intent of the steering committee in bringing this to the task force is first to develop a baseline knowledge amongst all of us of the fact that these have been passed by the legislature, the potential effects, and benefits, because obviously they were persuasive enough to pass the houses and get signed by the governor. So to just understand what these are getting at and what the potential problems are, and ultimately get to a point, although I don't think we're going to do all of that in the next task force meeting, of developing some responses. I don't think any responses, including recommending funding for body cams or records custodians, are off the table. But I don't think we're anywhere close to even considering recommendations at that first discussion. I think the main discussion will be trying to get a grip on what the problems were that these are intending to address, what the problems are that they've created in attempting to address that first set of problems, and how we might consider some responses at the local level.
Thank you, Stephen. Jill, I think you can take that off the screen unless anybody else has any questions or wants to look at any of the other bills. I see a hand from Mark Gardner. Go ahead.
Oh, hi. Just a quick read of the bill itself. So it may be an interpretation issue, but in the bill it says by July. I was going off the bill report, so that the dates might have changed a little bit. I did this memo very quickly, but it says by July 1st, 2022, the AG's office shall develop and publish model policies. Then it goes on to say by December 1st, 2022, all law enforcement agencies shall adopt policies consistent with the model policies or submit copies of the applicable policies to the Attorney General. So anyway, it seems like the codification formalization of this doesn't happen until the end of next year, but I guess it could be interpreted that the general intent should be brought into effect earlier. That's all.
Thank you, Mark. Any other comments or questions? All right, I think we're going to move to other business. One thing that we want to make sure we look at and keep on our thinking caps is data for the index committee of what Legal and Justice Committee want them to be able to pull. I'm more than happy to see if I can do some research with AOC to get some domestic violence data before the next meeting. But other items that we might want them to track in the future, whether it's DV or anything else that we're looking for. We're going to have a speaker, Alexis Harris, I believe at the September meeting. She's a professor at the University of Washington on sociology and is very knowledgeable in gathering data. She's done a lot of presentations on LFOs and poverty essentially, and how that affects us in the criminal justice system. So that should be a very interesting conversation in September. So have your thinking caps on for her. Feel free to research her. She's done a lot of awesome things. I've seen presentations Stephen has. Other things that have come up is reentry is something that's been on our agendas for quite some time. With COVID rules changing, we kind of want to touch base and look on that in the future. GARE and the usage of that in the Legal and Justice Committee and how it can be implemented, or if we have people that want to be more involved in GARE. Also, Jack Hovenier has brought up bail reform for future topics. So those are just other items that I've brought to my attention that we may want to discuss. Is there anything else from this committee that thinks that we should be looking at this year? Stephen.
I'm just going to say that that's a daunting list of topics, and it's really the basis for my pretty serious concern about going to 1 hour meetings. I understand people's time, but I can't see how we can do justice to more than a couple of those. And so it seems to call on the committee to think about some priority setting if we want to shorten the amount of time we have to deal with particular topics.
Thank you, Stephen. I agree with your concern that I think we should go with the trial, and sometimes separating some of the topics up through the committee so that we can get different speakers available might still be beneficial, but we won't know unless we try it. So hoping that this is beneficial, and I also would like direction from the committee on priority items that they think we should be looking at in the next future meetings. Any comments, questions, directions? Hearing none, I think we're ready to go towards public comment. Jill?
Thank you. We have one attendee today for this meeting, Heather Flaherty. Heather, if you'd like to speak to the committee, just go ahead and raise your hand. I don't see a hand raised.
All right, with that, I think we can call this meeting adjourned. It is 12:57 on July 13th. Thank everybody for your participation, and we'll see you in a month.